Close your eyes if you'd like and let your shoulders drop just a little. Take a breath. Imagine yourself sinking slowly into a softer rhythm, the kind of pace where time feels unhurried and the world grows quiet. Tonight, we drift back to a time many in America remember with firecrackers and flag waving, a time marked by declarations and revolutions, speeches and signatures. But our story tonight isn't one of fireworks or stirring anthems. Instead, we'll gently open the door to 1776 and look beyond the familiar stage. We'll step into the quieter corners of that year, the barns and kitchens, the market stalls, and the shadowed rooms where history didn't make bold proclamations, but simply was. Because while a group of men gathered to sign a document that would shape a nation, many others, millions, watched silently from the margins. They were not invited to the table. They were not free. So tonight, we explore the lives behind the myth. Who wasn't free in 1776? What did daily life look like for them? Enslaved laborers, indigenous people, women, indentured servants, and the poor. What did freedom mean to those who could not claim it? What kind of world did they wake up to on July 4th and every day after? Let us begin, not with fireworks, but with stillness. Imagine yourself waking before dawn in a modest wooden cabin, deep in the rural South. The walls are rough-hewn logs, the floor packed earth. The air is cool, damp, and still tinged with the scent of smoke from the previous night's hearth. You rise not from a bed, but from a straw-stuffed sack, stiff from the night's rest. This is the home of an enslaved field laborer, and the day begins with silence and enforced silence, one born not of peace, but of powerlessness. There is no bell to ring in liberty here, only the quiet pressure of a master's expectations. Before the sun lifts fully above the tree line, you are already in the fields. The dew clings to your bare feet. Tools are heavy, wooden-handled, and worn smooth by countless hands. Tobacco, indigo, or cotton, depending on the region, it doesn't matter. What matters is the rhythm. Bend, cut, lift, repeat. The hours pass in silence or hushed murmurs. Always watching, always watched. Meals are sparse, often cornmeal, a scrap of pork fat, maybe beans. The noon sun blazes, but rest is fleeting. Children, if they are old enough to walk, are working too. Those too young remain in care of others, sometimes just a few years older than themselves. Life here is defined not by personal time, but by borrowed labor. The rhythms are dictated by the overseer's voice, not your own. Shift your gaze northward to a city like Boston. The streets are narrower, cobbled, and uneven beneath leather soles. In cramped kitchens and garrets above shops, free black laborers and domestic servants move quietly through rooms filled with fine furniture and revolutionary rhetoric. They hear whispers of liberty, feel the vibration of protest, but know, intimately, that their place remains unmoved. Many black Bostonians are legally free, but live under constant scrutiny, surveillance, and social confinement. They cook the meals for revolutionaries who speak of freedom, pour tea for men who curse tyranny, and wash clothes for those who sign declarations. A little further inland, life for poor white farmers is quiet, though hardly free of its own restrictions. Land is precious. Droughts come without warning. Taxes loom. Many live indebted to local merchants or tied to the land through tenancy. The revolutionary cause may seem noble, but for many, it is remote. There are still fences to mend, crops to tend, and livestock to feed. The war, when it comes, may simply mean one fewer pair of hands at home. Elsewhere, across Pennsylvania and Virginia, indentured servants awaken in shared quarters, their contracts still years from completion. They came for hope, for a chance at something better. But in 1776, they are still bound by paper and by law. They rise early, eat little, and are kept to strict routines. Their freedom is conditional, not yet earned, and sometimes never truly granted. Some run away, blending in where they can. Others are caught and punished quietly. Now follow the trail westward, beyond the settled towns, into the deep forests and winding rivers of indigenous homelands. For Native communities, 1776 is not a hopeful turning point, but an encroaching shadow. Settlers push steadily into their lands, while political documents penned in faraway cities speak nothing of their existence. Still, daily life continues in villages beside lakes, in longhouses and wigwams, with farming, storytelling, hunting, gathering, and the ever-present effort to preserve culture amid rising threat. Ceremonies are still held. Children still learn the stories, but whispers of war hang in the trees. In all of these places, the July sun rises and sets, indifferent to history books yet to be written. Daily life for most is not filled with declarations or drums. It is filled with repetition. It is filled with survival. By nightfall, the enslaved rest beside hearths that provide little warmth. The indentured count the years they still owe. Indigenous families gather beneath open skies, watching stars as their ancestors once did, while soldiers draw closer. And in drawing rooms across the colonies, wealthy men toast to independence, perhaps unaware, or perhaps unbothered by how narrow their definition of all men truly is. Yet even in these quiet, overshadowed lives there is resilience, and whispered prayers, and lullabies, and the worn handles of tools passed down through generations, and herbs planted carefully behind cabins, and stories told around firelight that carry the weight of entire lineages. This, too, was 1776. Let us now turn our attention from the rhythms of collective daily life to the quiet yet profound biography of one individual, a woman whose name is not found in the textbooks with Jefferson or Franklin, and yet whose journey offers a revealing reflection of what freedom did or did not mean in 1776. Her name was Ona Judge. She was born into bondage, lived in the shadow of the founding fathers, and in time made a silent, determined escape that shook the very idea of liberty in the new republic. Imagine the stillness of Mount Vernon in the early morning. The estate of George Washington stretches wide, dotted with symmetrical gardens, grand halls, and rows of cabins that housed the many enslaved men and women who kept the estate running. Among them was Ona Judge, born around 1773, just a few years before the Declaration would be signed. She was the daughter of a black woman named Betty, an enslaved seamstress, and a white indentured servant named Andrew Judge. Because her mother was enslaved, so too was Ona. From an early age, Ona lived not in the fields, but within the main house, chosen to serve as a personal attendant to Martha Washington. Her duties were constant. She rose before the family did, prepared clothing, assisted with hair, and accompanied Martha on visits and public events. In this position, she saw the world of the powerful up close. She witnessed conversations about rights and rebellion, overheard the talk of liberty, and observed the calm authority with which the Washingtons moved through society. Yet, despite her proximity to power, Ona's life was never her own. When George Washington became president, Ona traveled with the family to New York and later to Philadelphia, which served as the temporary capital. In Philadelphia, a new idea entered her world: freedom. Pennsylvania law at the time allowed enslaved people to be freed after 6 months of residency. The Washingtons, aware of this law, rotated their enslaved staff back to Virginia just before the 6-month threshold. It was done quietly, with careful records and legal justifications. Liberty, it seems, could be paused with the right paperwork. And yet Ona listened. She watched. She learned. She saw free black communities in Philadelphia, heard their stories, saw their churches, their children playing. She recognized a possibility that had never seemed real before. And then one day the unspoken became urgent. In 1796, Ona learned that she was to be given as property to Martha Washington's granddaughter upon marriage. It would be a permanent assignment far from the city, and likely a life without even the small freedoms she had found in Philadelphia. The idea was intolerable. So under the cover of dusk, she slipped away. The Washingtons were furious. They placed advertisements in newspapers. They enlisted agents to track her down. Ona fled north, eventually settling in New Hampshire. There she lived not without hardship. Poverty, fear, and instability followed her, but she was free. She married, had children, and refused offers to return, even when the Washington family promised she would be treated kindly. She understood, perhaps more than most, that kindness was not freedom. Though she was never legally freed, Ona Judge lived out her life in the North. In her old age, she gave interviews, calm, reflective conversations where she recounted her escape. She never sought fame, never claimed to be a hero. She simply lived her life, one step at a time, toward a freedom others spoke of but rarely extended. Imagine her now, sitting beside a modest fire in New Hampshire, her hands folded quietly in her lap. She looks out the window, past the thin curtains, at a world still wrestling with the meaning of liberty. She says little, but in her silence is strength. The story of Ona Judge is not loud. It does not come with cannons or parades, but it lingers softly beneath the pages of history. A life not declared, but lived. A reminder that in 1776, freedom was a promise not yet delivered to all. And so we pause here, with Ona's quiet defiance echoing softly through time, before we move gently onward into the veiled histories, those not of people, but of forgotten places, and strange cultural customs left buried beneath the soil. Let your mind drift now. Drift beyond names and dates, beyond the neatly kept documents in museums. Let it wander into the landscape itself, the forests, the meadows, the marshlands. These places even now carry faint traces of lives lived quietly, just beyond the reach of formal history. In this segment, we will explore the archaeological echoes of the displaced in 1776, the evidence of communities who were here long before independence, and whose histories do not unfold in ink, but in stone, soil, and ash. Close your eyes and picture the American Northeast. Before the cities, before the roads, there were longhouses tucked beneath towering trees, their bark-covered walls absorbing the sounds of laughter, grinding stones, songs, and the quiet language of survival. The Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, the Wampanoag, and so many others once moved with ease through these lands. But by the late 1700s, these people faced relentless pressure displacement, disease, broken treaties, and war. Today, archaeologists find the remnants of their world buried beneath centuries of sediment. Hearth circles, slowly collapsing into themselves, whisper of meals shared. Bits of pottery, some plain, some finely etched, speak of trade, artistry, and care. Stone tools lay where they were dropped, forgotten in a hurried departure or a forced removal. These objects, though silent, form a kind of testimony, not loud, not triumphant, but real. One such site, quietly resting beneath a forest canopy in upstate New York, reveals a village once bustling with life. Excavations show patterns, storage pits for maize, post holes from communal dwellings, bones of deer and fish carefully prepared. Everything arranged with thought and precision. But what's equally telling is the absence. The sudden drop-off in occupation layers, a sign not of natural migration, but abrupt disruption. A war, a push westward, a treaty ignored, a culture interrupted. Further south in Virginia, remains of enslaved communities lie beneath the soil on former plantations. These quarters were often burned, dismantled, or allowed to rot once they were no longer needed, but traces persist. Foundation stones, shallow root cellars, and small personal items. A comb, a fragment of a clay pipe, a worn coin tell of private lives unfolding under the burden of forced labor. The artifacts here are humble but deeply personal. They suggest a quiet persistence, a need to carve out identity, even within confinement. And out on the coastal edges of Georgia and South Carolina, the remnants of Gola and Geechee communities offer another layer of mystery and memory. Descendants of West Africans, these groups preserved traditions in language, food, and spiritual practices woven through rice cultivation, sweetgrass basketry, and oral storytelling. Archaeological findings include hand-dug canals for rice fields, carved walking sticks, and home altars. These are not grand monuments, but they are vessels of resilience. It's easy, in history, to forget the landscapes, but the land remembers. Even places that seem untouched, quiet fields, rolling hills, were once sites of gathering, struggle, worship, and work. A clearing in the woods may have held a council fire. A stream may have been a boundary between peoples. The earth contains more than seeds, it holds memory. Archaeologists proceed slowly, brushing away layers of time with care. They do not rush, and neither shall we, because these traces of the past deserve tenderness. They tell stories that no one wrote down. They belong to people who lived, hoped, struggled, and vanished from the official record. And in uncovering them, we begin to understand just how much history lies beneath the surface of what we think we know. So now, let the echoes of those lives linger gently as we prepare to leave the soil behind and return to the surface. From silent stones and buried hearths, we move now into the high rooms of society, where freedom meant something very different indeed. Let us now rise from the lowlands and the layered earth and drift gently upward toward the high ceilings of Georgian homes, the polished floors of parlors, the clean, ordered world of those who signed their names with confidence. The final segment of our journey brings us to the lives of the colonial elite in 1776, not to judge or to praise, but to observe, to quietly contrast how freedom was lived by those who claimed it as their birthright. Picture a large home in Philadelphia, near Independence Hall. The air inside is cool despite the summer heat, shaded by heavy curtains and tall ceilings. Wax candles wait for dusk. The furnishings are imported mahogany from the West Indies, porcelain from China, rugs from the Ottoman world. A decanter of port rests on a silver tray. Everything in this room reflects wealth, refinement, and education. It is in such rooms that the phrase, "all men are created equal," was first rehearsed aloud. The men who gathered in the Continental Congress were landowners, lawyers, physicians, merchants, each with extensive correspondence, ledgers, and clients. Their suits were made from fine wool, their days filled with meetings, writing, and the deliberation of ideas. Their nights often were social balls, dinners, concerts, where politics mingled with courtship and reputation. Their libraries were thick with Locke, Cicero, and pamphlets from Paris and Edinburgh. They spoke often of rights, of tyranny, of destiny. Their wives, daughters, and sisters moved within adjacent spheres, writing letters, managing estates, educating children, and navigating the complex codes of reputation. A gentlewoman in 1776 might spend her morning overseeing servants, her afternoon composing notes in a careful hand, her evening entertaining guests beneath flickering candlelight. In households like these, education was both prized and restricted. Sons were trained for public life. Daughters were prepared to uphold it from behind lace and silence. Yet for all this elegance, these homes were not entirely serene. The war loomed. News traveled slowly but urgently, whispers of British troop movements. Protests turned violent, ports closed, crops seized. Some families hedged their bets, unsure whether rebellion would truly yield a nation. Others more fervently threw themselves into the cause, risking both fortune and standing. Still, even in wartime, many elite lives continued with a semblance of order. Music was played on harpsichords. Servants carried tea on trays. Lessons in French, Latin, and penmanship were given to children. The threat of battle was real, but not always present. Freedom for these families meant choices. It meant the ability to write one's beliefs without fear, to own property, to send sons abroad for education, to pass wealth from generation to generation. Their world was defined by stability. Even when revolution came, it was often they who led it, not from desperation, but from philosophy. And yet, that freedom was rarely extended downward. The very ink with which they wrote letters of independence was often carried in the same ships that trafficked enslaved bodies. The ports where they debated liberty were built by labor that had no liberty at all. The contradictions lived quietly in the background. A servant waiting silently in the hallway. A ledger noting the names and ages of property. A plantation managed from afar. These were the men who penned the future, and their households were the stage on which the performance of freedom was rehearsed. But outside those homes, just beyond the fine brickwork and the tended gardens, were people who could not read the declarations written in their name, who were not considered men in the revolutionary sense, and whose futures remained tightly bound by silence. So imagine, as the sun sets on July 4th, 1776, the warm glow of candlelight flickering across powdered wigs and polished shoes. The air is filled with speeches, toasts, and the clink of glass. Beyond the window panes, darkness gathers over the countryside, over the forests, the fields, the quarters, the wigwams, and the alleys. A nation is being born, but not everyone is being born into it. And with this contrast held gently in mind, we move now toward the final reflection, where history softens into night, and we leave 1776 behind. And so the day fades slowly, gently back into shadow. The candlelight of 1776 flickers into memory, and the bustle of Philadelphia's cobbled streets grows still. We leave behind the handwritten declarations, the sound of voices raised in Parliament, and the slow beat of wooden heels across polished floors. We have walked tonight through the unseen lives of the unfree, through the quiet cabins of the enslaved, the overgrown paths of displaced peoples, and the refined stillness of drawing rooms where freedom was often spoken of, yet rarely extended. We've moved with Ona Judge as she slipped from bondage into obscurity. We've stood quietly beside the hearths of forgotten villages. We've watched the revolution unfold from every angle, not with drums and muskets, but with measured breath and observant calm. And perhaps as you lie there now, eyes half closed, mind adrift, you can sense what history leaves out. Not just names or dates, but feelings. The dull ache of weariness after working someone else's field. The nervous stillness before a secret departure. The quiet pride in holding on to a culture, a language, or a family across generations of loss. The knowledge that even as liberty was declared, it was not yet delivered. But still, people endured. They sowed seeds. They sang. They told stories they hoped. And in that steady, persistent rhythm, so like the beat of a distant drum, so like the hush of wind in the trees, they laid the foundation for a broader freedom. One that would take generations to inch forward. One that remains, even now, unfinished. So rest now. Let the past sink gently beneath you like soil under bare feet. There is no need to remember every name or every year. Only this. Freedom in 1776 was real for some and only imagined for many others. And in that space between the real and the imagined, history quietly waits. You've journeyed far tonight. Drift now deeper into the stillness. The revolution will still be there in the morning. But tonight all is calm. All is calm.